Well, there's a lot of confusion out there about Austin, even though we just had the earnings call and some of the confusion was we were brought along a little bit. I've got, uh, a quasi expert. Phil Beisel is here with us with his experience back at Rivian. He knows something about these rollout kinds of situations in the car industry, and he follows it as closely as the rest of us do. And I just thought it would be nice to kind of take a look at where we are, where we're going. I thought that the most interesting thing that came out of the call was the confirmation that there would not be any supervised drivers in the seats in Austin.
Yeah.
So at least on day one, when they put the cars out, there won't be any supervisors. But prior to that, I think we've got a few steps to go through
Yeah.
to get to Austin. So I'll let you, I think you've got a slideshow for us today. And
Yeah, I threw something together. I think it will work for us.
okay.
Let me try to do that share thing. See how well I do this time. I think you see my screen now, right?
There you go. It's good.
Let me go into slide.
Slide presentation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Wait.
So
You're a pro.
yes. So what's interesting about this is I first the first question is like Austin, how big is this city? What's it like? And I thought I would throw something out about that because Austin's not small.
Uh,
That's a picture of sort of one of the major interstates running through the city through the
uh,
city. Um, and so what I did was I grabbed some stats about Austin, which I think are somewhat interesting. Population is about 1 million. It's the 10th or 11th largest city. I think it's right behind Jacksonville, Florida.
Look at that.
Yeah, so it's pretty darn big.
Yes.
I mean, Dallas is 1.2 something million, so it's not terribly far behind Dallas.
Yeah.
It's way behind Houston. Obviously, Houston's the biggest city in Texas.
Right.
Um, it's about 35 miles east to west by 30 miles north to south, and it's 325 square miles, which is a good amount of space. I mean, if you consider San Francisco, I think the population is about 700,000 ish. And we're
Mhm.
talking about the city of San Francisco,
Right.
not the greater Bay Area. But that's only a 7 by 7 mile city.
Right.
So,
Right.
49 square miles.
Right.
Um, Austin has 2,500 miles of roadway, and that is including the highways and every city street there is.
I see.
And they kind of give you another number on that, which is 9,000 lane miles. So that's literally, if you have a roadway with 4 lanes for
Sure.
1 mile, that would count by four.
Sure.
Um, and I'm doing this for an interesting reason. You'll see in a second. Try to
Okay.
understand coverage. It has about 1,100 or so traffic signals,
Hmm.
which obviously indicate major intersections as opposed to two-way, four-way stops. It has a lot of sidewalks
Yeah.
and a decent amount of bicycle lanes.
Yeah.
Um, so here's an interesting bit of stats. It's sort of it's not the worst, it's not the best, but sort of in the median of kind of accidents and deaths on the highway. And 24 crashes per day. They're just accidents. About 10.6 deaths per 100,000 people, and that's the national average is about 12.8. But
Fantastic.
just to point this out, I think in 23 it was like 12.8. So
Mm.
it's I could be wrong about that, but it's in the ballpark of average.
Okay.
Um, Not great, not awesome. About 75% of the fatalities occur on the highways.
Hmm.
But then, interestingly enough, this stat looks a little bit contradicting the previous one. Pedestrians are 2 out of 5 traffic deaths.
Well, every once in a while, I do see one of those homeless people out on the highway.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, there's obviously it's including some there, but I think that's an interesting number, right?
yes,
It's like
yes.
it's if you think about what we're about to do with Robotaxi, and we have pedestrians are the targets in some ways. you
Right.
know, it's not just crashing another vehicle or it's potentially hitting a pedestrian, hitting a bicyclist.
Sure.
So, so that's kind of I think the landscape of the thing.
Yeah.
So in other words. Tesla is entering into a trial in a very large and complex city. It is not a small city by any measure, and so it's the trial is about as real world as it gets. Is a good way of thinking about it. Um, so then I wanted to talk a little bit about this idea of what's going on in Austin and the trial itself. And so let's think about how Waymo is planted there today.
Yep.
Waymo does about 250,000 weekly rides in all its markets, and I believe that is San Francisco, Los Angeles, Phoenix, and Austin, if I'm right. Is that? Do you think that's right? I think that's
I
right.
think that's right. They've got another one opening. I forget what it is. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. They started very recently in Austin, and they're only covering 37 square miles. That's their geofenced
I see.
service area. So if you compare that to, it's 325 square
Right.
miles,
Right.
and they're going to cover 37 of that.
Hmm.
Right. Um, so it Austin accounts for somewhere between 10 and 20% of all their rides.
Okay.
Though I think it's, obviously it's on the ramp because
Sure.
it's brand new. Um, the average about 3 to 4 miles per ride, and there's about 25 to 50 vehicles. I've gotten conflicting sources that are in service there.
Okay.
So that's a good way to at least plant a flag and figure out where we are.
Hmm.
So now we have Tesla entering that market for the trial, and prior to the trial, the event that's occurring today is called Project Rodeo. That's why there's a little rodeo guy in the corner.
Hmm.
And so what Tesla's been doing is it has about 300 test operators. Um, I assume full-time or potentially part-time Tesla employees, and I specifically test operators because it's not everybody that's just sitting in car. It's I think it's the passengers, it's the supervising drivers, and to a certain extent, it's the remote operators being trained.
Hmm.
So it's kind of the whole banana. Um, and so I thought this would be an interesting way of thinking about it because I want to discuss a little bit about what I think they're doing. If you took one single driver and you gave him 24/7 driving a car with 20, driving 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, he would take about 13.6 days of continuous driving to cover every single road in Austin, all and the lanes, 9,000, we had what, or were we, 9,000 lane miles. So that's what it would take. It would
Okay.
take.
Yep. Yep.
Now, if we just thought that every one of those test operators were also potentially ride-alongs and FSD, it would take them about an hour
Mhm.
to cover every single road, given about 30 miles per driver.
Right.
So what that tells me is what I think is happening is that they're running every road multiple times, every intersection, everywhere they possibly can go, they're going. That is what I think is happening, and I
Hmm.
think they've been doing that for a couple months. Probably started not at 300, probably is at 300 now, and they are trying to cover situations in nighttime, daytime traffic, rain, every possible condition. And I would gather that knowing Tesla, they have literally some beautiful map that tells them um, how much of the coverage of every single potential road in Austin that they have run FSD through.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And then
Now,
theoretically, as you and I were just talking in the green room before we came on, I was just my vehicle had difficulty getting out of a strip mall because the traffic in both directions was practically chock-a-block. I mean, there was no, I couldn't have gotten in maybe if I had, you know, forced my way into the first lane and made traffic stop, and then forced my way into the opposite direction traffic
mhm,
and made them stop as well. Maybe I could have eventually gotten in if it was life or death. But in most circumstances, I would have just made a right turn there. And that's what I finally forced the car to do. But I would think that maybe part of this driving around Austin would also be driving in and out of strip
Yeah.
malls, driving in and out of shopping centers, driving in and out of grocery stores, etc.
Yeah, I'm sure that they have mapped out plausible destinations. And there's many clever ways that they can do that beyond just guessing.
Mhm.
But I'm sure that they've done that, and so they are already doing this. And what that should mean to us is that I'm pretty sure that their confidence level is high. They're not just going to throw a bunch of cars at it, and it's not like what I think is not true is it's not just taking the FSD we have in our cars today, throwing it on a car and saying good luck and adding the service to it. I think it's very curated and it's very um, manicured into
Right.
this way of doing it. Yeah, and I want to talk about FSD in a second. So I think in addition to that, I think that some of these 300 folks are being potentially transitioned, or some of them just in general are being trained as these remote operators that will be involved in
Mhm.
the remote teleoperation of the vehicles in what they call stuck cases. Um, and then they also mentioned that they're training with first responders, so people that the city personnel itself understands what these cars are
Mhm. Mhm.
and knows what the deal is if they should end up in an accident. And then we have been told that there are 10 to 20 vehicles to start. Now it's clear to me that they've got more than 10 to 20 vehicles on the road now,
Right. Right.
by far. And I think this will be circumstance where it may be just 10 to 20 in the first 2 days, and
Right.
then it's 50, 100, because really there is no scale limit at that point. It's just, I think, a, the situation is that they're going to very, very carefully monitor what happens in the first, couple hours, days,
Mhm.
and obviously weeks. And there's a great question I have is like, who's going to be able to sign up? Is there going to be a limited number of people because the availability is going to be extremely low, right? So, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then I wanted to talk about, things I know about a little bit more about the technical side is, what's going on with the FSD as we're sort of transitioning out of this 13.28 phase. What is the FSD for this trial, and then generally for robotaxi in general? So I'm pretty certain that the 300 test drivers or 300 test operators and all the cars are operating on FSD version 14, a
Mhm.
candidate release.
Mhm.
That is the unsupervised version. So I would guess it's a superset version, meaning that when it makes its way to our cars eventually, it may be called 14.16 or something, but it will probably be running in supervised mode until such time that, and in regional areas where you get approval that it could go unsupervised. But I believe I think this is the new train model. And I've talked about that in some of my articles that, I think version 14 has been under training for quite some time. And I think the reason that Tesla's been incredibly quiet in terms of releases is that actually Tesla's been incredibly busy.
Yeah.
And they have been training a model and running the data center flat out to build this newer, larger parameter model, with probably, there's a couple of things here. I think we may have talked about this in the past, but when you train these models, you have a amount of training data, which is huge. I mean, Tesla probably has, I don't know, a couple 100 billion maybe training samples that are set up for every possible driving scenario that they have imagined, collected, thought about, selected. And I've said in my articles that selection is one of the hardest
Sure.
problems here because clearly the amount of potential driving data is much larger. Okay. And once you have this large amount of potential samples for training, then of course there's all set aside of validation samples as well. Maybe 1/10 of the training set is validation. Um, and that informs the size of that data informs a bit about how long the training process in, you measure it in hours, days, weeks. I suspect that version 14 is no less than 2 months of flat out GPU compute time
Hmm.
at Cortex, or sorry, is it? Yeah, Cortex, right?
Cortex.
Is that, yeah, Cortex. And the data center that's in Austin, Texas, at the factory. And and then the other thing that changes in the potential models that they up the number of parameters. And if you're interested in that, you can read about FSD in some of my articles. But essentially, what we have in the parameters are these weights and biases, and they're basically numbers. But the size of that relates a little bit to the quality of it. Sort of bigger is better. I don't think there's a direct line, but I think bigger is better. And the reason that bigger didn't exist in version 12 and so forth is that it just takes a long time to compute. So if you take larger amount of training samples and larger amount number of parameters, you just grow the compute time. And the only way to compress the compute time at that point is to add more GPUs, right? So obviously that's happening coincident with all these other pieces, and they may be adding in, and we've heard that they've added in Dojo to a certain percentage of their own compute cluster, for about, I think they said something about maybe 10% of the training.
Something like that.
Yeah, something. Um, so so there you go. I think what's running around on those roads is version 14, or
Hmm.
at least a candidate release of version 14. Um, and when you think about robotaxi, another element of this is that for every robotaxi operating, I almost guarantee, could bet money, that every camera and microphone, the microphone is active and is recording the entire ride at all times.
Right.
There are good reasons for that from a liability point of view, for a data just a data collection point of view. If an accident occurs, and it's not Tesla's fault, Tesla will be able to prove it to the
Hmm.
world,
Hmm.
and it will be blamed immediately. Like I
I
think we're
agree.
in for honestly, I think we're in for a rocky month, because I think the press will just look for anything.
Sure. Sure they will.
Um, yeah, but I mean, but Tesla's collecting that data for lots of reasons, and they want to be able to validate every circumstance that they hear about. They'll have it recorded so they can go back and look at it, and I think that's a big part of it. So that data will be collected on the cars and um, asynchronously loaded to their data center, to the
Hmm.
cloud.
Hmm.
Um, I also think that part of the process in testing this is that they have actually been creating events, like almost creating intervention events randomly. I don't mean like driving the car off the road. I just mean
Right.
literally, I just mean time random events. And they've been doing this to learn how quickly the remote operators can take over and respond.
Hmm.
Um, Now, I don't think that we shouldn't think of the remote operators as they're going as the car is skidding into the intersection and about to hit somebody. A remote operator is going to come in and save the day. That's not what
Right.
remote operators are about. They're more about getting the car out of stuck situations where like the circumstance that you just described, where
Hmm.
you can't make that left turn, and there's probably a little button in the car um, for the rider to say help.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, and then in that case, either heuristically or through direct request, the remote operator will come online. It may not be obvious to the at all to the individual in the car, but remote operator, and I'm sure they're testing this,
Yeah.
so that's part of it.
And from what we've gathered this week, I believe, is that that remote operator will not be able to take over control of the car. It would be a case of where somehow the remote operator is telling the passenger, what to do in that situation. In the case of Waymo, Waymo then has
Oh, okay,
in the case of Waymo, Waymo has a crew of individuals who
yeah,
are on the ready to go out if necessary with a physical vehicle
yeah,
to take care of what's happening at the location.
I
So,
mean, yeah, I mean, certainly they can allow the remote operator to control the car, whether they've set up to do that and whether they're
right,
going to do that from a policy or, procedural. And yes, you're right. I mean, there's lots of things you can do there. But the point is that they'll have a remote view into the
right,
car,
right,
and they'll be able to look at it situationally, possibly talk, as you say, talk to the passenger, instruct the passenger, just wait. One of our other cars is coming, or please don't get out of the car here in the middle of
right,
this
right,
intersection,
right.
that type of thing. Yeah. I also think one of the interesting question marks is, and I left it as a question mark because I have no data on it, is, where are the charging and cleaning stations that,
Mhm.
and is there something coming up? I had a discussion before about this, and I thought that a lot of people would guess that they would be coincident with superchargers,
Mhm.
at supercharger sites, and I believe that's the case. But I also think in dense cities, Tesla could be leasing empty warehouses and using indoor spaces for that kind of service because they probably want to take, like, at least Cybercab, they'll want to take it out of weather situations, right? It's very hard to clean it by robot if there's a water ingress from just,
Right.
I mean, like if you had 30-mile-an-hour winds with rain coming horizontal, how do you open the windows without getting the car soaking wet?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I think, we don't see that. I mean, maybe someone's seen it, but I haven't seen any photos or spy photos of any purpose-built charging or cleaning. And,
Right,
and, and, and in some sense, we shouldn't expect that maybe yet because we don't have cybercab, so we don't need the inductive charging,
right.
the kind of charging for the Model Ys in the trial. Maybe we didn't say this, but the trial is all Model Y vehicles, from what I understand,
Yes. Mhm.
which makes sense. Beautiful cars to use for this, and so I think in that point, any you probably they'll have manned some and taken over a couple spots in superchargers in the Austin area.
Right.
Um, so the rest of the discussion, I wanted to just talk about FSD challenges. What's different about FSD in robotaxi mode versus you and I using it,
Hmm.
and sort of like what I mean by that is very, very near term robotaxi mode, like the trial
Right.
specifically.
Right.
And I started off by saying there are no unique challenges. I think that the design philosophy of FSD that will carry through is that they are building a one size fits all system that should be able to traverse any road, any unseen road, just like you and I. Um, Now, they had made mention and they talked in the recent earnings call about training models for specific weather in Boston versus, and I have a lot of questions about that because I think, yeah, I don't think they said that with precision. What I mean by that is, um, you wouldn't release a model in the Boston metro, Massachusetts area to deal with snow and rain because it can rain here in San Jose. It's not as if there's something. It's the matter of um, duration and severity in some of those environments. It's not. I mean, there are plenty of sunny days in Boston.
So it
So
could be, so it could be one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I think you're the one that brought this up, is that we have the inference chip, the FSD chip in the car that will be the same for every car, I think.
yes,
But then you've got the cloud, our Grok, and or the remote driver, the remote, individuals. So you got three people, the three ways that you may be interfacing with the car that is not through the chip. And when you're going in that particular interface, like with your app, and you're saying pick me up, and the car picks you up, and then you tell it where you want to go, etc. When you're in that particular part of the experience, if it's snowing like crazy and it's not safe to go, then it could easily be a case where the cloud would know that it's snowing like crazy and it's not safe to go. And it would say, I'm sorry, we can't take the ride at this time.
yeah,
Or there's an accident, or there's I had this in
Yeah, yeah,
I had this in Paris where they were having not riots, but a bunch of folks were protesting, and it had closed all the bridges. Uh,
right,
and so how you couldn't get I couldn't get back to the hotel without going 30 miles south of town. So the driver knew to do that, to go 30 miles south of town. Cost
right.
me $180 for a 15-dollar trip. But maybe the dojo or the not dojo, the grok or the remote driver or somebody knows to say, okay, we know that there's this issue right now in terms of the weather, in terms of the road conditions, in terms
Yeah.
of whatever, and therefore we need this workaround.
Yeah, I think that's sort of where I was leaning into is this what I call uh, granular geofencing.
Okay.
So really, what that means is, I think here's what I think is the kind of step back on this. Uh, so they've probably been training a version 14 candidate, the unsupervised version, for quite some time. They probably have a candidate release. They've been using that in the field. Before having that, they were probably using 13.2.8, just
Mhm.
like just like
Mhm.
the rest of us, or maybe some version thereof. Um, they've been running as many miles as possible across every potential intersection and roadway segment in Austin. They may have taken a lot of specific training data back where they saw issues and started to fine tune that model.
Mhm.
So fine tuning really, in the simple terms, is just sort of taking a train model and further training it with a test set that you want to kind of fix problems with. And
Yes.
then when you're left with the resulting model, now you have to just validate that it fixes the problems that you're trying to address and doesn't create any regressions.
Mhm.
You're not creating new
Right.
problems type of thing. So I think what they've done is they've looked at this trial and they said, okay, look at this intersection. It's a very unusual one. And we had some issues. So let's do some test runs through here. Let's label some video segments and retrain the model and see how we perform. Oh, okay. We're making it through this intersection. We're not having that problem. So I think like right now, if you think about it from a worldwide view, wherever FSD is being used, predominantly, obviously in the U.S., Tesla is looking at interventions and other deltas between running it in shadow mode on your car and what you do as a driver. And they're saying, okay, these are things we should look at. And so they've got a team and an infrastructure and a process set up to look at strange events, interventions. It would be the
Mhm.
easiest thing to think about in this case. Now, I think they've really dialed that in Austin, and they've basically said, let's look specifically at all the data that we see, and any test operator running through this intersection can build a report that says the thing is stuck, or it's not, or it took the left lane when it should have taken the right lane here
Mhm.
for and then they could take that sample data and fine tune the model to get something that works very well in Austin. Now, it doesn't mean that suddenly they built something for Austin that isn't representative of how it would work in Los Angeles. In fact, it may be a superset and a good thing that they did that. But I'm just saying that they've really dialed down into that. And I think in addition to that, that they may, this is some guesswork here, that they may have built some very granular geofencing into it so that they can literally exclude certain intersections
Sure.
and road segments. And frankly, what that means to the rider is it's fairly transparent. The rider might be curious why it doesn't go down First Street and it only took the Second Street, but it's maybe because that First Street and Fifth, or whatever that intersection is. See, I don't know Austin, so I'm making up the road
Sure, sure,
names.
sure, sure.
But that they've basically geofenced that intersection out because they're not convinced that they're comfortable with it.
Yeah, and we
Yeah.
know this, and we know all these kinds of approaches are possible because Waymo is doing it now.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Waymo
mean,
doesn't, but Waymo can't go over 35 miles an hour, or I forget what the amount is now, maybe
Right.
it's 45. So it can't go on certain roads at all. And so those are geofenced out.
Yeah, I think what they've done is they've set up they've set up a geofencing model,
Mhm.
and that is sort of an informed thing that gets sent through the context window of the AI as they're
Mhm.
doing
Mhm.
their inference, and just and oh, also I should say through the general navigation system as well. Remember, because beyond FSD, the very first thing that happens is the car navigates once it knows the destination, it builds a route,
Right,
right? And we're used to that before
right,
FSD,
right,
and so that geofence can be built into that routing component, so it can exclude areas. And then the other thing that could be happening, interesting enough, is that they could flag certain areas for remote monitoring.
right.
So something very proactive. They're like, okay, we're a little suspicious. Like for example, maybe they removed an exclusionary geofence out of this first and market intersection, but then they've added it to the remote monitoring so that they like really look at all those cases of cars that are routing through there, and they can see, oh yeah, okay, it's cured. The problem is cured.
Mhm.
So that's sort of it for what I had to say. I think the kind of takeaway is that they're really, really deep into this Austin situation and getting it um, set up for success as much as possible, and that they probably put as many miles in already than they'll do in the first couple weeks of the trial. Frankly, that's
Yeah,
what I think. Yeah,
yeah. And then, you could probably stop sharing now. The other thought that came up this morning, I forget how it came up, maybe as a comment, is that potentially these 300 vehicles that are being used in Austin now might just be and taken over to Dallas next, or taken
yeah,
over to Houston next, or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
And they might, because they talked about 3 cities by the end of the year initially, but
yeah,
now they're talking about many cities. They've changed the
yeah.
wording to many cities.
Well, I mean, Randy, I was thinking about that a bit too. Is they may already be there.
Yeah, they may already have some more cars.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
it's this is in this case where there is this is the most unscalable component of their enterprise, right? Because they're mo and by the way, a good way of thinking about it is they're kind of like being in this mode of operation where they're trying to go to general purpose. They're really in Waymo mode,
right, right.
right? And I mean, Waymo's kind of stuck in that mode to a certain
Yes.
extent, as based on how they do their business. But I think yes, you're completely right. Is that they're going to take if they're successful and how they've honed their skill set and how they've certified Austin,
Mhm.
they're probably going to move to a next
Mhm.
candidate city, and I would gather it's in Texas anyway. Um, so you look at the Texas laws for doing what they're doing is they're the most. It's really the most permissive. It's the most Wild West,
Right.
and liabilities push mostly back on Tesla, and then people don't over don't over regulate it.
Right, right, right.
Um, so yeah, I think you're right. I mean, either they're going there next, or they're already planted in Dallas or some other potential city. And I think Dallas is probably obvious candidate. Really, it's roughly about the size of Austin, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It's a little bit bigger. It's like another 200,000 people.
right.
Maybe the highway system's a bit bigger, but yeah. So it's really interesting because I think we are in that state where they have really double clicked down and got into the weeds of, okay, what does it take to drive every street in this town of Austin? And they may have built their nav computer or their navigation systems and these trial systems to literally run the streets in
Hmm.
some
Hmm.
weird pattern to get coverage. And they probably mapped that coverage, and they're like, okay, and we're only missed 1% of every potential street at this point. So we have run FSD through every, and that includes, you would have to then therefore think of it as every left-hand turn that's
Right, right,
possible,
right, right.
and every right-hand turn that's possible, and and so forth. So yeah,
Yeah, okay. And so then a lot of people in the comments over the last couple of days I've noticed are throwing up ideas like that, well, they're going to run into all kinds of problems and this is going to be way slower ramp than we think. And,
Mm.
the negative Nellies. And hey, they might be right. There's
Yeah,
gonna
yeah,
be all kinds of crazy
yeah,
stuff that happens that isn't really on the known list right now. However, one of the things I've commented on last week, and I think people should take this into consideration in their game plan thinking, is that Tesla is going where Waymo has gone before.
yeah,
They're going where Uber has gone before. So it isn't like they're going in blind. It isn't like there isn't already a player that's been in this territory. I kind of speculate that as opposed to going into other cities in Texas, that they might follow and go into San Francisco and then go to Phoenix. And then, and I think the next one
yeah,
is Atlanta or something. I forget now which one follows after that. They might follow Waymo because the ground has been plowed,
right.
and there's an opportunity to just kind of follow on, both from the standpoint of they can have seen what Waymo ran into. Sorry to use that word, ran into anyway, and they also know that the community will be used to the idea. They were already seeing cars driving
Yes.
around with no driver, uh,
Yeah,
cars driving around with nobody in the driver's seat. So there could
yeah.
be some real advantages to just kind of following Waymo from city to city until they grow past them.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I think what we have here is, from an, I think this is a very engineering driven process. I mean, I don't think it's like a marketing driven process. That they're very much doing this from the ground up, and they're looking at and saying, we need to be successful. Yes, so there's some markers of things that they want to do, but
Right.
they're saying, let's really go deep, and let's make sure that FSD operate, because really the linchpin of the entire system is FSD. I mean, that's
Right.
all obvious to everyone, but there are other components of this. The
Sure.
service is big, the matching component of it. There's a lot to this. Those things are easier. They're maybe not the rocket science category. FSD is the hard one. Um, I'm sure the people in manufacturing say building cybercabs every 5 seconds is the hard one, and it is. But FSD is the one that will be visible, and it's sort of the linchpin component of it. It's the thing that is sort of the advertised. This is a driverless car.
Right. Right.
So I think through the last year, as we've run through version 12 and version 13, that they have matured their organization greatly, um, to be able to understand the data inflows and the deltas that they see
Mhm.
between what they expect FSD to do and what it does. And I think we often think of that as they examining the interventions, and I think that is true. But I would tell you this: most interventions today are just drivers without grok yet. What that means is most interventions are, I didn't want to go that way and I can't figure out how to, I don't have the time to set the nav to a different destination, so I'm just going to break out of and take that exit. And so it's not a intervention, oh, I was going to collide with a car type of
Right. Right.
intervention.
Right. Right.
And then I say there's probably about 20% are in that camp of, oh, I needed to control this car because it was going to do something I didn't want it to do.
Well, and the thing is that I've been saying for a long time, and I don't know why others aren't saying the same thing, kind of repeating it because it seems important to me. Tesla should know what percentage of the interventions were not just safety interventions because the driver thought it was a safety intervention, but were actual safety
Right.
interventions. Because
Right.
they should be able to run the simulation and say what was going to happen in the next
Yeah.
seconds to find out whether there was really an accident going to take place or whether the car would have slammed on the brakes or taken evasive action. Because quite frankly, again, I don't drive very many miles in my car, but I've been shocked over and over again at how quickly this car responds.
Yeah.
I can't
Well, I
yet,
mean,
yeah.
uh, I think there's a couple thoughts on that. First off, if you look at FSD, the inference process, this is where it's doing the planning, it's taking in the perception, it's taking in the raw data, perceiving the environment, building a plan.
Mhm.
the word plan is always a misnomer here because it sounds like some thing that you do over a long term, but the plan is being built every 15 to 30 times a second.
Yeah, right.
And so and in addition to that, its perception is so much faster than the human eye. I mean, we are, uh, besides being distracted, we are not looking, like if you consider a car in lane one and the Tesla's in lane two, you're self-driving. Maybe I got the lane numbers backwards here, but um, there's some lane numbering scheme. I forget how that goes. But this, the Tesla here is looking for this car to take any movement
Right.
that's a merge movement. And it's going to do it. If it's doing it 15 to 30 times a second, you think a human's doing that? No. I mean, a human may be looking this way
Right.
and not even seeing that. And there's a lot of humans I talk to that talking about this problem. They said, well, I don't trust FSD because any car could run it. And I'm like, well, what makes you think you're better than a computer's looking at that problem? I mean, that's insane,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But it does take some time for us to see that, to understand that that's happening.
Right.
And further, you know, to the extent that what Tesla has built internally is a driving physics simulator where they can do lots of things in that harness.
Mm-hmm.
They can not only validate or revalidate situational data. So an example, you said there's an intervention, and they're going to gather 30 seconds before and 30 seconds after that intervention in complete resolution video.
Right.
They're going to transfer all of that to Tesla, and Tesla's going to, if it meets some criteria, because there's probably a lot of them coming in now, given the scale, but they're going to load that into the simulator. And in some cases, maybe a human is just going to step through each thing, and then they're going to flag it, and then they're going to move it up the chain to somebody else that's going to look, and eventually gets in front of an AI engineer who's trying to determine whether there's a real issue here. In addition, that simulator, beyond being a test harness and a observational thing, is also something that generates synthetic data, right? So what they can do is they can say, okay, here we are, downtown San Jose, we're in this intersection. Let's change the configuration of the intersection completely because we don't see any, like, let's just get rid of the traffic lights and throw in stop signs, or let's change the median from palm trees to something that maybe cuts off your visibility of the oncoming lanes, or let's add snow. You know, you could add snow in San Jose, even though it rarely snows. So then you can then run that through. Now you taken that data. Now you can run it through the natural, the natural model, and you can say, well, how does this thing react? So I mean, I've said this a couple times, and hopefully somebody's believed me, that before Tesla releases a model based on the validation data set, they probably know how it's going to perform down to a very, very, tight tolerance of they've computed the people understanding the AI side will understand what I'm saying here. They've computed the loss function. They know how far away they are from the perfect drive in that model. And they can say, okay, their validation data has shown. So I think before, 13.2.8 shows up and we all play around with it and we all tell, Tesla probably already knows what we're going to experience, and they're there.
Right.
They're there. Yeah. So it's a process where over the last, a lot of us think of it as like statically. We hear about it today. That means they started it today.
Yeah.
That's completely wrong, right? I mean, they've probably, and you and I were talking about this the other day, is that based on the fact that they've been at this a while, and FSD has not, through version 10 and 11, there was no potential convergence, right? They were doing an algorithmic model, and they finally switched over to a AI model, and then they start to see convergence. Like, in other words, this thing is going to solve a problem, the problem. They've been at this a long time, so that around the perimeter of the thing, they've developed an infrastructure, process infrastructure to be able to measure success and select failure and and that's part of it. And so when people say to me things like, well, so and so is going to show up and just create an FSD knockoff, the reason, from my background, for people who are listening don't know, I've been an engineer. That's what I do. And as a result of that, I realize how deep that other parts of the process are that require you to build up a huge harness or infrastructure around the thing and institutional knowledge.
Right.
You can't just snap your fingers and say, I know everything about this problem. Um, you have to you have to develop your technique for the AI that you're building, which Tesla has, and then you've got to build systems around it and then in some cases you throw things out, that didn't work. So that idea that you're going to copy paste this system is just like, it's a non-starter. Yeah.
I'm going to start trying to remember to end many of my programs with this admonition. For any of those who are watching right now who have FSD, have paid for FSD, and aren't using FSD, give it a try again.
Yeah.
It's a completely different experience than it was even 6 months ago. I encourage you to do that. If you don't have FSD, but you have a Tesla and you haven't subscribed recently, you can subscribe for a month. Cost you $100 to give it a try. Again, same admonition. Try it out. It is absolutely stunning how well it works. And this is for somebody who kind of gave up on it. And when I say gave up, I didn't give up on the ultimate
Yeah.
dream,
Yeah.
but I gave up driving it, a couple of times because it was kind of scary. It's no longer scary. It works. It works like magic.
Randy, in engineering, the reason that they have this thing called R&D is that, there is a research phase, and companies like Tesla, because of we all have to experience, we're all part of I mean, they used to call it FSD beta, right?
Right.
Right. We're all part of that. We all of a sudden are thrown into something we're not naturally. I mean, other than saying you can opt into an early release of iPhone, and a lot of people listening to this may be like deep into this. Oh, I got beta software all the time.
Yeah.
But your average, consumer doesn't probably even know what beta or alpha or any of these terms mean. And so they're not used to the idea that a company, can put something out there and it's part of the research phase, and they're honing it, and that is not to say they're reckless. That's crazy too. They're obviously the liability is so strongly on them that they take this very seriously. And so there's no recklessness to it. It's just a matter of the only way to converge this to solution is to involve the users. It is one of the weirdest engineering problems. I don't know about that. It is a different engineering problem than just like building an interface, solving a problem, putting it out there. You test it a couple times. Are your workflow's good? Yes. Okay. Boom. What is it, like Zoom? We're using Zoom. What are the possible parameters? FSD has just got such an incredibly long tail of variants that there are some things that I've experienced in the car with FSD that you will never experience, and so forth and so on. So it means that we're all party to it. And so now, for maybe the first time in some big release and well-publicized type of thing, we're all party to the engineering process. And some of us get it, and some of us don't. Because it's not natural if you do accounting to understand what's going on here necessarily, right? And not to say that the engineers understand anything about accounting, but the process here is exposed, and it's out there. And so then you get a lot of folks that don't want to see it succeed. They say, well, Elon's been promising this forever. But remember, in the research phase of a product, again, R&D, you don't know. There's no way in the research. You are doing the research to see if you can then develop to the finish line something.
Right.
You don't know the answer. Elon does not know, or anybody in SpaceX does not know, whether they're going to be able to land Starship as well as the booster, or catch until they do it and do it again. And what Elon's process is, which is really quite obvious to people that do engineering, is that he's kind of building a fail-fast model here. And the idea that his iteration is so fast that then he's converging based on that, and he's willing to try things. Now, I hate to say the word crash because in this context of FSD, it invokes,
The
a lot
wrong.
of yeah, a lot of potential criticism, but that's not really what's going on. And so I think that's what the big takeaway is, that this product FSD, this has been a research project for quite some time. They've tried a lot of different techniques. Some of those techniques, especially those old algorithmic techniques of writing code to do the planning, were tossed aside, and not too long ago, I might add. And then suddenly AI has come on as such a storm, in terms of a new technique to do this, where it's almost ideally suited to solve this problem
Right.
because it is a heuristical kind of thing. It is not a precise. The part I wrote this 4-part series on FSD, and the last one is really kind of fun because I compare the code model
Yes.
to the AI model. And what I say about that is that in the code model, actually armchair engineers understand the code model, even if they've never written code. Here's why. Because when you think of the problem, if I ask a individual who does something else in their life besides engineering, and I say, how do you think the car does this in this circumstance? And what that person is going to conjure up is a sort of if condition then action scenario. They're going to think that they've never maybe written code.
Right.
They've never seen if then clauses in C++ or but what they're thinking is, if the light turns red, I stop.
Right.
If this happens, I do this, right? So, and they start layering that together and they start to imagine a solution. And that's how version 10 and 11 worked. Now come version 12 and now 13 and probably 14. Well, I mean, definitely 14. I just don't know if 14's done yet. We've switched to a completely different way of making those decisions using this AI.
Right.
And so that particular article kind of explains the differences and why it's hard for the average person to kind of go, oh, that's going to work, But it's not much different than saying, and to a certain extent, well, I can probably think about a search engine. If I put a couple words in how a search engine goes about finding the answers and building a list of the top 10 or 15 things that meet the conditions of my search. But I have a hard time understanding how a large language model type of, AI assistant like ChatGPT or Grok, how do they work?
How do they write a book on a prompt?
Yeah, it's so that's why my series is called The Magic of FSD, because I was trying to conjure up this idea that for most people it's sort of magic unless you really dig in. It's not natural to think about how it's solved. Right. That's all. Yeah.
Okay, so
all right.
Phil, thanks again for coming on and helping us figure it out. I think maybe this will make you feel more comfortable that this rollout is probably going to be smooth as silk. Doesn't mean that there isn't going to be situations that pop up. Doesn't mean that the press isn't going to be trying to find anything that they can to make this man bites dog happen so they can get a good headline. But I think it's well thought through, and I think the overall transition into this new world is going to be quite rapid, actually. So again, Phil, thanks a bunch, and to all of you out there, it's been great talking to you.